We have the UN Women, Deputy Country Representative with us. We have the Head of Cooperation and Culture Affairs of the French Embassy with us. We have the Chairperson, Board of Directors, National Union of Women with Disabilities with us. We have the Head of Programs for Reach a Hand Uganda and the Program Officer for Women Pro Bono Initiative as our panelists today. So this particular side event is organized and titled An Action for Bodily Autonomy and Sexual and Reproductive Health and Rights in Uganda. And it's a webinar led by the civil society organizations as you see them on the screen. These are the Center for Health, Human Rights and Development, FIDA, Reach a Hand Uganda, Women with a Mission, NWODU, and the Women Pro Bono Initiative that came together and worked with the UN Women to ensure that we amplify the voices of gender equality during this particular period. So we'll allow our speakers some time to speak, and we will pose questions both by show of hands. There's an icon for raised hand when you look at your screen, but also the question and answer icon can be utilized. We'll keep taking note of the questions as they come in, and each of the speakers will be requested to respond to the questions as they come. We want to thank all those that are online with us today and request that we keep on and ask as many questions as possible. So we'll start this session with, we'll start off with Ms. Adzekemi Ndieli, the Deputy Country Representative of UN Women, who is going to have a conversation with us on the rationale behind the Gender Equality Forum and the context behind sexual and reproductive health and rights. Kemi, the floor is yours. Kemi?
Very much. Yes, thank you very much. I was trying to mute there and put on my camera. Okay, it seems like the cameras have been disabled. Okay, so thank you so much for having us this afternoon and on the eve of the Generation Equality Forum in Paris, France. We appreciate all those who have joined us on this forum, and also appreciate your partnership. A little bit about the Generation Equality Forum. It is a global gathering of gender equality activists and actors across the world, convened and powered by UN Women and hosted by two governments two governments. The first being Mexico and France. It is in partnership with youth, civil society, governments across the world. And you must have heard that the forum kicked off in March in Mexico with different platforms and opportunities and a global gathering to gear up towards the culmination in Paris starting tomorrow. So the forum in Paris is from tomorrow, the 30th, the 1st and the 2nd of July, 2021. And at the Mexico forum, UN Women with all the partners and the government of Mexico launched a series of concrete, but we also see them as rather ambitious and important transformative actions to enable us achieve the immediate and irreversible progress on gender equality. So why the forum at this time? We all know that COVID-19 came in 2020 or towards the end of 2019, and there were quite very important issues faced by the whole world in addressing the challenges of COVID-19. So the forum actually responds to the fact that after the Beijing Platform for Action, I'm sure that there's nobody on this forum who doesn't know about the Beijing Platform for Action 1995. That's 26 years ago. At that women's conference, there were strategic and bold actions taken, and the decisions made in that conference are regarded as the blueprint, timeless blueprint for promoting the rights of women across the world. However, we noticed that progress has been slow in implementing those commitments in every country. Not a single country, even after the MDGs, not a single country today can claim that they have gender equality in line with all the aspirations in the 12 critical areas of concerns for Beijing Platform for Action. So the purpose for generation equality is to work with women's rights groups, government, civil society, private sector, and other actors to address the current risk that we might even be experiencing a rollback of the gains that have been made in some countries over the years as a result of the COVID-19 crisis. Besides that, we also have poverty, we have the risk of violence, we have economic challenges, and there's a plethora of challenges facing countries across the world, which continue to make it quite challenging to meet with SDG 5. So this is a critical moment for all actors across the world, particularly gender equality actors and governments. And while COVID-19 has exacerbated the situation, we think that it is a critical moment and a pivotal moment for us to be able to address issues around unpaid care work, the fact that women's lives are insecure, the unequal pay gap, informal jobs that women continue to face, the challenges of indigenous women. Women are also more affected and disproportionately affected when it comes to crisis. So the challenges are quite broad and far-reaching. And since that landmark platform for action, following analysis that has been conducted in different countries across the world, we realize that it is more of a rhetoric that has not been matched with action by implementation of those commitments. And we think that the Generation Equality Forum will enable us to galvanize action. So this is a forum that represents a key moment for gender equality advocates across the world, from every sector you can imagine. As I said, government, entrepreneurship, trade unions, artists, academia, social actors, social influencers, and you name it. And so the Generation Equality Forum is built around 6 action coalitions based on human rights principles and through a data-driven process. These 6 action coalitions have been identified, and has been a very strong tool for feminist action and grassroots action at all levels. The first area is on gender-based violence, the second on economic justice and rights, the third on bodily autonomy, sexual or reproductive health and rights, which is the focus of our discussion today. The fourth area is on feminist action for climate justice. The fifth area is on technology and innovation for gender equality. And then the last area is on feminist movements and leadership. However, there's also something that we call a compact on women's peace and security and humanitarian action. This is a somewhat cross-cutting thematic area that would power all the other 6 action coalitions. Because without peace and security, you cannot be pursuing feminist action for climate justice. Or without peace and security, you cannot be pushing for women's leadership. So a lot has to do with peace and security, and that's why that compact exists there. So let me wrap up by saying the thinking and the expectation is that these action coalitions made up of government, civil society, international organizations, private sector, which have already been constituted along those 6 lines, would catalyze collective action at the global and national levels and regional level, at all levels, in fact. They will also be responsible for sparking global and local conversations around the different generations. This is being led by young people. And we say that they're the leaders of now and tomorrow. So we want to hear what they have to say, and they are leading in these discussions and driving the process. It's also going to increase public and private investments, and this is key, because without sufficient resources, there's no way we can push this agenda. And finally, to deliver concrete, game-changing action and results for women and girls across the world. So in a nutshell, this is what the discussions in Mexico was about. And the momentum is heating up for Paris starting tomorrow. And we want to encourage everyone. I will ask my colleague Elizabeth, please paste the information for people to be able to join the forum in Paris tomorrow. You need to register. And there, a lot of discussion. We will be hearing from heads of state. We'll be hearing from high-level representatives from every sector in society. They will be showcasing their commitments and trailblazing commitments for governments and corporations to show everyone everywhere that we can bring about a change with tangible action. Let me stop here and give the opportunity for others to talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Kemi. You seem to give us a very good background to the forum and remind us of the 25 years of the Beijing Declaration, as well as why it's important that we actually have such conversations. One would really want to wonder whether, when it comes to sexual and reproductive health and rights, key issues that the Beijing Declaration aims to achieve are actually achieved. So I will want to ask Benson to come and give us a conversation about the young people. It's been 25 years of the declaration. So the key question for us would be, what do we see when it comes to young people's sexual reproductive health and rights? And since Rahul has been on the forefront for advancing rights of young people, I wonder if Benson can really speak to us in light of the 25 years that we are commemorating or celebrating vis-a-vis what we actually see on ground. Benson, the floor is yours. Benson? Okay, looks like we have lost Benson. Perfect. Okay, so we'll pose that question when he gets online. We understand that it's not very easy in the afternoons to have networks as stable as we ought to have them. So we'll then turn around to Beatrice. Beatrice works with the Women's Pro Bono Initiative, and they have done some work on ensuring access to justice and gender equality. So one wonders whether what Uganda committed to towards gender equality is faring on well. So Beatrice, recognizing that Uganda has had a number of commitments, how is the country faring when it comes to recognizing the rights of women to control aspects of their rights? And most particularly would be good if you really highlighted for us how Uganda the Beijing into its various legislations while ensuring that gender equality is actually realized and bodily autonomy into these legislations. Beatrice?
Thank you so much, Noro. My name is Kaga Beatrice. I work with the Women's Pro Bono Initiative as a programs and as well as the legal officer. The Women's Pro Bono Initiative was established to provide free legal services to women and girls who cannot otherwise access justice in any manner or form. Um, True, as the moderator has been informing us, it's been so many years after the 1995 Beijing conference. And when we look at that conference, we see that after it, many countries are set on a journey to ensure that women's rights are recognized globally. However, this has been a slow process for most countries. Women up to date are still underpaid and still continue to form multiple forms of violence. And the reports are so alarming. As for Uganda, we can recall that in our first lockdown that we had last year, we had multiple cases of sexual violence that were coming through in our legal office. We had so many victims of sexual violence, and these could not, on top of that, access justice since the courts were also closed off. So that leaves a big gap still in our systems and also in our policies. But before we completely disregard what the government of Uganda has done so far, it's nice to recognize some of its efforts in that area. We can get to know that the government of Uganda, after the 1995 Beijing conference, it adopted the national gender policy, whose main objective was actually to mainstream gender concerns in national development processes. And this was mainly to ensure that the resources were allocated in a manner that respects gender equality. Then also the action plan on women's rights. We realized that this action plan was in 1999, which it addresses issues of violence against women. It also addresses issues of sexual reproductive health rights for women. Then we cannot forget the mighty affirmative action chapter within our constitution. So we look at that as one of the steps, some of the few steps that the government of Uganda has taken. But despite those so many milestones and all that, I can say that still we are lacking. When we look at the policy framers, I can happily say that our policy framers or the makers of most of our laws in Uganda come from a place of privilege. So this makes them biased. that they have less touch to the reality of what's happening. And therefore, I can say that when people from places of privilege sit down to make laws, they pay a deaf ear to the intersectional issues or the overlapping issues that various categories of people face, most especially women. And that's why up to date, we still have laws that aim at policing women's bodies. And so they take away the women's right to bodily autonomy, which is our main topic for the day. Personally, I would define autonomy as a right to make decisions over one's life and future. And it's about being empowered to make decisions or choices that matter to you. And what I can say is that the inequality that still persists in our laws in Uganda basically also comes from that privileged background of our policymakers and all that. So the systemic manifestation of discrimination in our laws and policies is still present. So because of that privilege and the people who are out of touch with reality when it comes to the policy and everything that pertains to the rights of women. So when we look at some of the laws, I'm not going to go very far. We just start with a recently passed sexual offences bill. Realize that this bill caused a lot of chaos when it was passed. It has not yet been assented to. That's the position for now. But we can see that one of the main clauses that took away the bodily autonomy, the autonomy for women to consent to sex, the clause was actually removed from the bill. And we can say that simply because the lawmakers decided they were not sure what consensual sex means. They were not sure what consent is, and they were giving very many descriptions of what consent could mean. So this law actually took away the women's right to consent to sex, and it basically legitimizes rape as this is still embedded in our laws, despite the so many efforts that many organizations are trying to make towards achieving women's rights and all that. So when we look at access to contraception, we can say that the women's reproductive autonomy in Uganda has been restricted when it comes to access to abortion, to a safe and legal abortion. And this is literally through our constitution. Um, from some of our research as an organization that we made, we realized that there are young girls who perform abortions in unsafe places, such as bushes. Someone is given a concoction, actually, they drink and the fetus is expelled from the body. And usually we find out that these girls later on, if they don't suffer any, if at all the girl suffers a complication, they end up dying. So the restrictive nature of the environment, the legal environment, more so when we look at our constitution, it restricts abortion, but provides for the exceptional circumstances. And that's when the life of the mother is in danger. But when we look at our penal code, it actually criminalizes procreation of an abortion, either by yourself or by another person. And so this whole restrictive nature, it makes young girls to procure unsafe abortion, leading to high number of death rates, which are usually clustered as maternal mortality rates. And because most of the time the government does not want to state it clearly that these are the people who have died due to unsafe abortions, it's after you've dug deep in the statistics, you get to know actually, oh, there is someone who died, there is a great number of girls who died due to unsafe abortions. Then still when it comes to the restrictive environment, we look at the fact that the removal of the guidelines that on the safe of sorry the other aspect I'd like to talk about is that when it comes to access to sexual reproductive when it comes to access to sexual reproductive health services and the rights thereunder, we see that young boys and girls cannot access contraception. And yet, when we look at our statistics, the Uganda Demographic Survey states that 19% of teenagers aged between 15 to 19 have actually had sex and the girls have given birth. We look at the fact that our constitution sets the age of consent to 18. And it's presumed that at that age, the boy or girl is able to marry and found a family. It's based on that aspect. However, we ignore the fact that we have teenagers who are having sex, and this leads to the high rate of pregnancy, the school dropouts due to pregnancies. And so these become barriers for young girls to actually complete education. And so they lag behind. When we look at the Sustainable Development Goal 5, and their aim is basically to leave no one behind. But every time we have girls dropping out of school, we are actually leaving so many behind. And the only solution there, we need to harmonize the laws to ensure that the age of consent to young girls and boys accessing contraception is actually reduced to maybe 16, if we can borrow jurisprudence from South Africa and other countries. From our research still, when we're in the Karamoja region, we interviewed quite a number of young girls and boys. And one of the boys told us that they have the health centers in their region have condoms. And so these boys are in secondary school and they would say, oh, in the evening, you run to the health center, pick a condom, make sure no adult sees you, then you run back and then you meet with your girlfriend and have sex. Then one of the questions I asked him was like, so what if you don't find a condom that day? What do you do? He's like, oh, I asked my girlfriend to take a Septrin before we can actually engage. So still, from that research that we did, we got to understand that there is a wide gap between the law and the actual reality. We don't want to accept as a country some of the issues that are happening actually on the ground. And that's why I keep saying that the privilege that makes people deaf to some of the overlapping issues that different categories of people face in accessing sexual reproductive health services, later on also being able to enjoy the rights, actually makes the country come up with laws that are gender blind, laws that actually are out of touch with the reality. And one of our biggest recommendations there is to harmonize the law to make sure that the age of consent for young adolescents in order to access contraception should actually be reduced to around 16 years actually. Then lastly, one of our recommendations after the various studies that we did in the Karamoja region, we realized that there is need for government to remove the reservation on the Article 14 of the Maputo Protocol, because we need to have laws that are progressive in nature and not regressive, starting with the Sexual Offences Bill. That law is so regressive. It takes us back to zero. It's like there is nothing. on gender equality. It takes away the right to autonomy, and also when we look at the various laws under which the government, which have been drafted by the government, some of them are not gender responsive, rather they are gender blind. The other issue I'd like to talk about is actually access to justice still by women during this time. The Constitution of Uganda, under Article 33, is to the effect that women shall be accorded equal dignity with men, which is also under Article 21. But when it comes to access to justice in Uganda, women face so many barriers. Every stage of the process, there is literally a barrier. When we look at the stage of investigation, from our daily experience, when we look at investigation, most especially in criminal cases, you go to the police station and the first issue that the police officer asks for is transport, and we all know what transport is. Yes.
Okay, perhaps we've lost Beatrice. I want us to just vis-a-vis what we realize. When I look at our constitution, it's very, Beatrice, are you there?
Yes.
Oh, please proceed.
Hello?
I thought we had lost. Please proceed.
Okay, thank you. When we look at the investigation stage, I'm still talking about the stages of accessing justice. First, we have the investigation stage when it comes to criminal matters, and every time we go to a police station to actually help a victim of sexual violence report a matter, the first question usually the police officers ask is whether you have some transport. And that becomes a hindrance in such a way that if a woman is not empowered, or if at all they're not empowered in any way, they cannot actually get a matter investigated. The police officer will actually tell you, I'll not move unless you've given me some money. Then when we reach the prosecution stage requires victims of sexual violence to come every day to court to give evidence, and that the transportation alone to court every day becomes a hindrance for a woman to actually access justice. And even the language that's used in the court, some of them can even be traumatized and they can't actually give evidence depending on the gravity of the offense. So such stages usually leave out women, if at all they are not empowered in any form, either economically, whether if they are illiterate, and so they end up not accessing justice. When we look at this COVID time, we've been in lockdown, and so many women have experienced gender-based violence. And our constitution tells us that justice shall be done to all, irrespective of their economic and social status. Justice shall not be delayed. All those became a myth during the lockdown. Why? Because the women were locked in their homes with their abusers who beat them on a daily basis. There is no access to the courts. And so at that stage that we say that there was denial of access to justice in that way. And so even when we look at the standards and guidelines that the SOPs for COVID-19 prevention, all of them, they were gender blind, they were not responsive to some of the needs that may be urgent for women, and even the lack of shelters by government, all that built up to that issue that made it harder for women to access justice. Further, in one of the studies that we conducted in Chiriandongo, it was on knowledge, attitudes, and perceptions on access to justice amongst the refugees. We found out that actually in this community, it was the cluster leaders that decided actually it's the cluster leaders who decide who can go to court, how far can the matter go, because so many young girls report matters of sexual violence, but unless a cluster leader says that the matter should be forwarded to the police station so that the victim can get justice, then you have no solution. So basically most of these young girls would report cases to the cluster leaders, of which the cluster leaders majority are men. And so at that stage they take away their right to access justice. Why? They hold the identification permit. The identification permit in the refugee settlement usually is held by the family head. And in some families, it's men. And unless a girl has the identification permit with her as they go to report the matter to the police station, they cannot access justice. So we found out that in this settlement, people preferred the informal justice system. And we found out that rape matters, matters of defilement, matters of child marriages were being settled in the refugee camp by the cluster leaders, and of which the cluster leaders, most of them are men. So we still see that even within this space where we assume, oh, we've reached a stage where women's rights are being respected, they're being promoted, still there are gaps. There's still so many gaps that make women to stay behind. And therefore, the women need economic empowerment. When it comes to the sexual and reproductive autonomy, we need laws that are progressive, laws that would put into accommodation the different needs of women and young girls. The restrictions need to be removed that have been laid down by the laws to accommodate the various needs, the intersectional issues or aspects, or the other overlapping issues that various categories of people face, most especially women, because they are majority. Then I also wanted to speak to access to justice for women with disabilities. In some of the cases that we talk about, I'm going to say that yes, we recognize that in our communities, we have women with disabilities, but most of the times these have been left behind in one way or the other when it comes to accessing justice. In one of the cases that we've seen in Gulu, there are women with intellectual disability. These women faced from sexual violence, and when they went to the police station to report the matter, they were never, the cases were never taken down in records as having been reported. And what does that speak to us? That women with disabilities actually face multiple levels of discrimination when it comes to accessing justice. Why? First of all, when someone has an intellectual disability, they'll be like, what are the chances that they will give credible evidence? What are the chances that they are believable? And yet in our justice system, those are some of the issues the law has been trying to erase. But when we look at these women with the disabilities that we represent, we look at those various intersectional aspects that made them actually delay to get justice. Justice delayed is justice denied is a normal term that we use. But when we look at, yes?
Beatrice, thank you. I'm very certain that you're preempting the presentation that Rose would really want to speak to, the chairperson, board of directors of the National Union of Women with Disabilities. So I would love to cut you short, and I apologize because we are sure that many of our panelists will be leaving at 4 p.m. 4 p.m., but also to allow her the space to actually speak to what they really see on a daily. Before I invite Rose, I really wanted to have a conversation on what Uganda has taken on as its statistics that after about 5 years, the Ugandan government comes up with a document that we call the Uganda Demographic and Health Survey. And when you read the key findings from this particular document, you actually see that the key issues that Beatrice, thank you so much, has been speaking to are the same things that the government seems to find as their specific findings. I've just looked at the section on gender-based violence, and when I look at it, we actually recognize as a country that actually violence does happen. If I may just briefly speak to this. When you look at key findings on domestic violence, for example, one of that is that about 56% of ever married women and 44% of ever married men have experienced physical, sexual, emotional violence by their current or most recent partner. As if that is not enough, we also recognize as the findings in this very document that half of women, which is 51%, and men, which is 52%, between the ages of 15 to 49, have experienced physical violence since the age of 15. And when it comes to marital control, as a country, we actually agree that 37% of ever married women and 33% of ever married men reported that their current or most recent spouse or partner had ever exhibited at least 3 types of specified controlling behavior. And we go ahead to speak to injuries due to spousal violence. And in our findings in the UDHS of Uganda, it actually says that among those who have ever experienced spousal violence, 39% of women and 21% of men have sustained some form of violence. I have critically looked at the UDHS, and I really wanted to get the key findings of the UDHS when it comes to violence among women living with disabilities. Unfortunately, I have not seen that. So I want to call on Rose to have a conversation on the key issues affecting women with disabilities and those that hinder gender equality this afternoon. Rose, you are welcome.
Thank you very much, Nuru. I want, first of all, to take the opportunity to organize of this conversation, which is bringing all the women across board. I am very grateful to be part.
Just a brief, my apologies, Rose. Sorry, I should have apologized first.
Yes.
We had set aside sign language interpreters. Unfortunately, the video sharing icon looks like we started with the panelists only, and I think when we disabled for everybody, we cannot enable now. So we want to apologize that our sign language interpretation cannot happen at the moment. Yet we are also aware of what happens with Zoom meetings if you do not restrict some of these icons. So we truly apologize for that, but we are very aware that we needed this. So in other planned engagements, we will try to see that we actually have sign language as part of this. Please go on, Rose. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Apology accepted. I just want to make the audience understand that NUWODO is a women-led disabled people's organization, and we are a voice of the women and girls with disabilities. And we base our work basically on defending, protecting, and advocating for the rights of women and girls with disabilities. But also we look at the equal opportunities that are there among the women and girls with disabilities in Uganda. Just as you have said, the issues of sexual reproductive health, the plight of women and girls with disabilities is not the simple sum of the barriers that are faced by the women mainstream. The combination of the disability and the inferior status as women goes beyond the mechanical doubling of discrimination to a situation of social alienation and policy neglect. What are those key issues that we look at? The first one is about the attitude of the members of the communities, of the citizens, of the women. This attitude that people think that women and girls with disabilities do not have a right to know their bodies, but also to the intimate relationship is something that kills the whole right of woman with disability to be able to know more about her sexual reproductive health rights. We all know that a woman, whether you are a woman with disability, you have a right to know about your bodies. For example, in Uganda, we all know that when a girl child is growing up, you know the issue of aunties, the sengas, teaching children to know about the girls, to know about themselves. This doesn't happen with a girl with disability. And this leaves them to learn by themselves. And in the process of learning, they do things that they think is their right, but they are doing it by even abusing themselves. For example, this girl will have to know how to go about with her periods. She will dirty herself because there's nobody to teach her how to manage her periods. When we are talking about having children, having sex, how do they go in for this sex? It's like somebody has come, they grab the person because that is their chance. They do not have a choice. It's because we always discriminate them. They are not supposed to get information. And this is a very big hindrance in terms of accessing issues of sexual reproductive health. For example, family planning. How do we make women and girls with disabilities access family planning? When we know very well that the information that is being passed, looking at the different types of disabilities, how is the information accessible to a deaf person? How is the information accessible to a blind person? How do we make information to a person with a psychosocial disability? All these are complex issues of information. We are talking about communication. Sometimes we organize meetings. You have just apologized. How inclusive are our meetings to make the message sink to each and every woman? Whether it is in the local language or it is in the English, I mean the official language. All this makes us have issues of failing to get information. The physical access. A number of women with disabilities, when they get pregnant, they fear to go for antenatal because, first of all, they look at a woman who is on a wheelchair, a woman who is on crutches, a woman who is crawling down, and people will start having sympathy. Why have sympathy for me? I have got pregnant by choice or by chance, but I have already got pregnant. What we need is, how do we accept these women? Instead of saying, Bambi, why have you again got pregnant? And yet you're already disabled. These are some of the key issues that take away the women and girls with disabilities to even go in for these antenatal services, because people do not look at them as women who should be able to have families, who should be able to have children. These are issues that we are really struggling with, and we think that even as Wodo is doing advocacy, how do we do advocacy collectively as women? And we look at ourselves that a woman with a disability has the same sexual reproductive health issues and rights like any other woman, so that when we are having issues of accessibility, let it be universal. If we are going to go to labor beds, Let us not start telling the women that you climb this bed because you were able to climb the other bed when you are in the intimate relationship. But let's understand that if we have a universal labor bed that is adjustable, it will benefit even that woman, because at the time when you are having labor pains, you are completely a disabled woman. So these are some of the issues that we need to think about in terms of making sexual reproductive health an inclusive matter if we are talking about equality. The other thing is that we have seen women with disabilities do not have control over their bodies. This is a very sad experience, that even when we try to teach these women that you can decide to have control over your bodies by even having a choice of the number of children that you need to do. This is a woman who was able to go for family planning, and when she was going with a lot of fear. She did not even agree with her partner. She went and got this, and after the husband realizing that this woman had an implant as a method of her family planning, the husband threatened to kill the woman to the extent that this man had to get a knife and remove the implant. Now, this kind of thing brings in fear in the women with disabilities, but also it brings in the issue of policymakers, the law enforcement people. How do we enforce laws to protect this woman to manage whatever choice she has made? Because this is about her body, the body autonomy we are talking about. These are some of the things that really is affecting women and girls with disabilities. Beatrice has just mentioned the issue of access to justice. This is a violation of somebody. It is violence. But do you think this woman, even if she reported, where would her case end? Because they would think she is wasting time. So these are some of the key things that we are seeing. The issue of marrying women with disabilities. They are just pushing these girls because they know she is not having any value. They push you to an old man and say, this is supposed to be your husband. And the man gives them some little bride price. But this is without consent of this woman. This is without agreeing that, this is my right to choose my partner. The other thing which is very, very, very serious is with people with psychosocial disability. People are looking at these women as a very big problem to them. And because of that, people are going as far as sterilizing these women, sterilization, without consent of this man. All we need is, yes, psychosocial disability is there, mental disability is there, we are all prone to this, but how do we handle it? How do we help them to support themselves? There are mechanisms, but because we do not look at them as human beings, we go against their rights. Basically, the issue of inequality and discrimination is something which is real. I don't know, as women's rights movement in Uganda, how can we speak for all the women, whether you are disabled or not disabled, so that we are able to achieve more than what we think? Because when it comes to issues of women with disabilities, we then think that is the issue of Nwodo. The policies that are there, how do we make these policies to protect everybody? Today, you may not be having a disability, but even as you grow, you are going to have disability. So how do we prepare ourselves? How do we make these laws to protect us the way we say these laws are supposed to be protecting us? We are looking at the access of justice. As Beatrice said clearly, sometimes people look at your disability and then they rule and say this one may not be able to give us clear information. Who tells you? Why don't you understand this person? And the whole thing is about persons with disabilities are expensive. Persons with disabilities take a lot of our time. Persons with disabilities are ugly. These are all things that affect the issue of gender inequality in our society. It is until when women and girls in Uganda are able to hold the hands, to hold that hand of a girl, to hold the hand of a woman with disability. Despite your disability, we are all one. Then we shall be talking about inclusiveness in totality for protecting everybody so that we are able to do our work as women, because women with disabilities issues are really cross-cutting. When the deputy country representative of UN Women, Kemi, was talking about the 6 pillars, when you look at all those 6 pillars, all those affect women with disabilities. The issue of gender-based violence. We are seeing a number of women with disabilities are faced with gender-based violence by the people within their families. And you know, they cannot speak it. They are always quiet because they know if they speak it out, after that, who will protect them? Because we don't have shelters that are accessible that can take care of them. These shelters are so far apart. How do they move to go to such shelters? Are they even aware? Because as Nuwodo, we are not covering the whole country in terms of doing our work. But how can the women's rights movement incorporate the rural woman, the woman with disability, whatever, into their programming so that we are able to see an inclusive women's rights movement in totality? The other thing that I want us to talk about is if we are, I know there's time for recommendation, but for me, I think we need to prioritize the sexual reproductive health rights and the gender-based violence coordination platforms to update gender-based violence referrals for sharing with key stakeholders to ensure all victim assistance mechanisms are accessible and inclusive of women and girls with disabilities, and the protection of the mainstreaming within all responses in all sectors. If we can do this, then we shall be able to understand. But we need clear data. Maybe why people are not able to talk about issues of women and girls with disabilities is because Nuru, you have said it, very little knowledge seems to be, very little facts seems to be coming out that looks at issues of women with disabilities, and sometimes people think everything is okay. I think basically this is what I thought I needed to share with you, but because of the time, I know there may be questions. I will be ready to answer. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Rose. You really speak to issues that everybody would want to hear. So I want to move a bit faster and again thank those that are posting the questions in the chat and request more of us to actually pose more questions in the chat. In the question and answer icon, there's an icon of Q&A. It's meant for questions and answers. Please post the questions and we'll have a response to the questions. I'm very certain that we are all alive to the issues that are being discussed here. And I want to call upon Benson from Richard Hand, Uganda, to respond to the earlier question that we had posed on what it means to ensure that young people access to SRHR and there's gender equality in the circle. And given that Rahul has had experience speaking to and advancing rights of the young people. So what issues affect young people and what affects or hinders their realization of gender equality? Benson.
Yes, Noor, thank you so much. I hope you're able to hear me now.
Yes, please.
Great.
Please proceed.
Thank you. Looking at what we are, discussing today, it becomes very important for us to look at this comprehensively. As Reach a Hand Uganda, our focus has been on the young people and how they can be able to access sexual reproductive health information and services. But along the way, we realized that there are a lot of hiccups. Now, the discussion that we are having today, in as far as gender equality, body autonomy, and then sexual reproductive health, this cannot be separated from the rest of the environment around the young people. If you look at, for example, SDG 5, there's a very good relationship with all the other SDGs from 1 to 4. Look at the issues. For example, recently we ran a story with on NBS TV with Canary Mugome, and we were highlighting the plight of the young girls in Kasese. When someone reaches a point of having to exchange sex for sanitary pads, it's very sad, but it's happening. And what are the drivers of such vices in communities? These girls are poor, they cannot access these sanitary pads. But also their parents are in the same category. They are not able to provide for their children. So how do we comprehensively address these issues? If you look at poverty, now that we are in another lockdown, these young people are not having access to food. And then, of course, it gets to the quality of the education and the health, or the good health that we talk about in SDG 3. So all these facets need to be interconnected for us to have gender equality, the body autonomy, and the access to sexual reproductive health services that we are talking about today. We have a lot of categories of people, and I thank the previous speakers, they have spoken to these. The girls living in the refugee or the settlements, and those that are living with disabilities. These young girls and women are facing a lot of hurdles, especially with now the new lockdown. So for us, we continue to, say, how can we provide accurate information to these young people? At every level we find them, young girls, young women, but also people in their surrounding, because we realize that people in their circles, people in their surrounding are the ones that are actually perpetrating some of these vices that we are talking about. So the focus should be on the young girls and women, but also their environment. And so as Reach a Hand, we are trying as much as possible to build a movement of young people within the different districts that we are supporting. But of course, this can only be, wider or bigger if we join hands. That we have a young person that has comprehensive information about their body, about life in general, life skills, livelihood, looking at life in totality. Sexual reproductive health or gender equality cannot exist in isolation. But if we can create young people, we see the population in Uganda, we are largely a very young population. So we need to harness this opportunity and make sure that these young people get comprehensive information about life. And then sexual reproductive health is really part of it. We know that health really encompasses all the other aspects, the mental, social, psychological, and so on. So we need to make sure that all these fit together for us to be able to address the issues that we are seeing with young girls and the young women. For us to be able to even have this young population of young people contribute to the demographic dividends, the NDP3 and so on and so forth, we need to work together as partners, as government, to make sure that at the end of the day, the population that we have now of young people are able in the future to be able to make a contribution to the development of this country. Where is the quality of life of these young people? Which kind of life are they leading? if you look at, for example, the crime report for 2020, the police report, it's very saddening. And I know that now we are in the second lockdown. More of these are going to come up. I mean, some of them are not even gone back to school. You look at children or young girls that were defiled by their guardians. We are looking at a number around 120, but these are the ones that were reported. You look at those that were defiled by their parents. You look at those that were defiled, those that had disabilities, the number came through very well. So these are people who are supposed to be protecting these young girls. How then do we make sure that the young girls have access to family planning services? They are being discriminated against because they are young, and we are saying, no, let the young people come to the facilities, let them meet in their own groups, but be able to share sexual and reproductive health information, including access to contraceptives. But what are we saying as a society? We are saying, oh, these are young people. Even health workers that have been trained in some health centers, these young children or young girls will be sent away and they will not access family planning services. You look at the unsafe abortions. Where is the access to comprehensive abortion care services or post-abortion care services? Whether we say that the abortions are not happening, we cannot, the law gives you in the other hand and then takes away in the other. That story, that's part of the stories that we have collected in the communities. One of the young girls spoke and said, if I knew that if I had used the contraceptive, it would have been better for me to prevent this pregnancy that actually ended into an abortion. Quoting her words, she said, because of love, I did it without fear. For her, that is love. But then we are saying, how can we then provide information to make sure that she's able to know, oh yes, I'm falling in love, but the decision has to be a very appropriate decision. It has to be a very correct decision. And many, many other young ones like these are there. Many young girls and women are out there, in such limbo like this girl here. So we need to continue to address the myths and misconceptions, but also make sure that the people, for example, in law enforcement, there is a follow-up and make sure that some of these cases are brought, all these cases are brought to a logical conclusion. If there's a common saying that we'll take you for an example and others will see from you, these are not happening in communities. Parents are sitting down with the perpetrators, and this is in exchange for cows and goats and so on. But we are saying that these young people need to comprehensively have information, know that education is key for them, and that gets at the center stage. But also knowing that us as adults or those that are older have a responsibility to play. So this brings in the aspect of having intergenerational dialogues. Where do we place the men? Where do we place the neighbors, the uncles, the leaders? Can we have more of these dialogues at community level and push these vices and tell these people that this is actually not acceptable? And when you get to these communities, people will actually say, yes, we acknowledge and we commit to fighting them. But we can't do this alone. We need a hand. We need to join forces. We need to join hands and make sure that we have more of these intergenerational dialogues and work with all the sectors, government, and civil society organizations. Can we have a movement of young people at all levels? As Reach a Hand, every year we have a Peer Educators Academy, and this is focused at providing the comprehensive package that I'm talking about here, including sexual reproductive health. Body autonomy is also part of the topics that we talk about, or gender equality. Now, if we purpose to have as many young people in all these communities, we are sure that in churches we'll have young people that will speak the language that we are talking about here. We are pushing young people, those that have passion for politics, those that have passion for arts, skills, sports, and so on, so that in every sector we have young people that can speak well about the sexual and reproductive health rights, that are very responsive to gender equality. We have now young people that are getting into local councils. We have some that have gone through academy that are now part of the National Youth Council. And we are saying we need to have many of these. We need to have MPs at that level that can speak about sexual and reproductive health, not those who are pushing agendas and are saying, you listen to some of the MPs and you say, okay, where are we headed? But then we have a responsibility as partners to make sure that this movement exists, and we are very deliberate about it, so that we are looking for a society that is comprehensively looking at the SDGs that we're talking about, to be able to get the demographic dividend and have a better quality of life given the young people that we have as a country in Uganda. The point of emphasis that I'm going to probably be the last thing that I'm sharing about because of time is that once we empower the young girls and women, and they have this information, but also knowing that they are not living in a, they are living in a community, and target those that we think can be very critical in the lives of these young people, and make sure that they are all responsive. The policies are being implemented, not the ones we have that are being shelved. We can go a long way to make sure that we attain the gender equality that we want to see, that is responsive to the needs of our society as Uganda, but also the world at large. The other thing that is very critical is that there are as many young children, young girls, young women that are giving birth in facilities. And you look at it and say, these are young girls who are supposed to be in school, who are supposed to be leading a life. Can we continue to amplify this voice and say, even when they go to the facilities, they should not die. They should be assisted to deliver and be rehabilitated to get to school. Not that when they get breasts and they start to menstruate, people are looking at them as sources of income in terms of cows and chicken and so on and so forth. So for us as young people, our call is that we need to have access to information and services, but also focus on all the others comprehensively, including livelihood, because if we are poor, definitely the decisions that we're going to make are going to be more inclined to how we are going to survive, because survival is what people, as a people, we need. So for us to be able to address this, we need to look at it comprehensively from all the angles and work with all the partners, build a movement that will continue to speak a language that is understandable by us here, but also by the young people. Thank you so much. Back to you, Nuru.
Thank you so much, Benson. I'm very certain that the key conversations about young people speak volumes at this time when we are very sure that Uganda's population, a bigger part of it are young people. And when it comes to SRHR and gender equality, I'm very certain that we all want to have a conversation that prepares them to live better lives. So I want to open up at this particular time, and I'll request my panelists to respond to the questions that are in the question and answer. Some questions have been specifically posed for specific people, while I'm very certain some will be coming in from whoever would feel comfortable responding to the same. So Kemi wants to respond to the first question. And the first question is from Salemwa Albert. It says the need to expand opportunities for men, women, boys, and girls, not only as a human rights, but also as a means for sustainable inclusive development is a great measure of our patience to tackle this issue once and for all. This is noted from the gender responsive legal and policy environment aimed at reducing gender inequalities and vulnerabilities across different social, political, and economic spheres. We can achieve this if and when we work together. Kemi, you had typed that you wanted to answer this live. Is that, do you want to add more to this?
Yeah, thank you, moderator, and thanks to the participants who asked that question.